The lights of New York City hid an eerie silence within the dark of the night. Often, when the city's bright streets heard the old tales of wandering spirits, they tried to forget. But one night, a new story began. Sarah, who lived in an old, creepy building in New York, began feeling something strange one evening. It was 3 a.m., and the city was completely silent. She heard footsteps near her door. Someone was walking near her walls. She opened her eyes wide, trying to see, but nothing appeared. Time passed, but the sounds only grew louder each night. Sarah called her friend, Jake, a local reporter. Jake had heard some old stories about the building. Years ago, a mysterious event had taken place there. An old theater stood where the building now was, and the spirit of Mr. Black, a man trapped in dark magic, still haunted the place. Sarah and Jake decided to investigate. When they went through the old records, they found out that many people had died in the building, and their spirits never found peace. These spirits wandered the city every night, spreading fear. Mr. Black's spirit, which had been trapped there, sought to terrify anyone who came near. One night, when Sarah heard footsteps at her door again, she opened it, and standing before her was a man in an old, worn suit, Mr. Black. His face held a terrifying smile that would haunt Sarah's dreams forever. Jake and Sarah gathered their courage and decided to put an end to the restless spirit. They knew they had to do something, but they weren't sure where to begin. All they knew was that the darkness behind the city's lights would never truly end. As the days went by, Sarah couldn't shake off the image of Mr. Black standing in front of her. His eyes, hollow and cold, still haunted her every time she closed her eyes. She felt as though she was being watched, even when she was alone in her apartment. Jake, determined to help, dug deeper into the building's past. He found an old map of the city, showing that the land the building stood on was once home to a mysterious occult group that had been wiped out years ago, supposedly by the very spirit of Mr. Black. The group had made a pact with him, seeking eternal life through dark rituals. When things went wrong, Mr. Black's spirit was bound to the building forever. One night, as Sarah and Jake met in the library to discuss their findings, the lights flickered, and the temperature dropped. A strange whisper filled the air, as though something or someone was trying to communicate with them. "You cannot escape me." The voice was deep and chilling, and it sent a shiver down their spines. Sarah's heart raced as she turned toward Jake, but he wasn't there anymore. She blinked, and suddenly, the library was empty, save for a cold, creeping fog that seemed to materialize from the walls. Sarah tried to run, but her legs felt heavy, as though the very building was holding her in place. She could hear footsteps again, faint, slow, deliberate. They were growing louder. Panicking, she looked around for Jake, but there was no sign of him. Just then, a shadow appeared in front of her, growing larger and larger until it engulfed the room. It was Mr. Black, his face twisted in anger. "You shouldn't have come," he growled, his voice echoing through the room. But this time, Sarah wasn't afraid. She had learned something during her investigation. Mr. Black's power was tied to the building. The only way to defeat him was to break the curse that had trapped him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an old, worn-out key that Jake had found hidden in the library's archives. The key was said to open the door to the building's hidden basement, a place where the occult group had performed their final ritual. With trembling hands, Sarah inserted the key into the ground beneath her feet, and a loud creaking sound filled the room. The floor split open, revealing a dark, winding staircase leading down into the depths of the building. "You can't stop me!" Mr. Black screamed, his form flickering with anger. But Sarah stepped forward, determined to end the terror once and for all. As she descended into the basement, she could feel the heavy presence of the spirit growing weaker, as if the walls themselves were fighting to keep him contained. At the bottom of the stairs, she found an old, stone altar covered in ancient symbols. It was here that Mr. Black had made his pact. She placed the key on the altar and spoke the words she had read in the old texts, words that were said to break the curse. The room began to shake violently as Mr. Black's angry form lunged toward her, but it was too late. A blinding light filled the room, and the shadow of Mr. Black screamed in agony, fading into nothingness. Silence! Sarah stood in the basement, breathing heavily. She had done it. She had broken the curse. Epilogue: the next morning, when Sarah walked outside, the city of New York seemed brighter, as if the shadows that once haunted the streets had lifted. People walked by without noticing anything strange. But Sarah knew the truth. The darkness that had once ruled this place was gone, but the memory of Mr. Black would stay with her forever. She never spoke of that night again, but she knew that the spirit of New York itself had witnessed the battle between light and shadow. And while the city continued to hum with life, Sarah would always carry the secret of the shadows beneath its surface. Weeks passed since Sarah had broken the curse. The city seemed to return to its usual, bustling rhythm, but Sarah couldn't forget the feeling of the darkness that had once surrounded her. Every corner she turned, every shadow that stretched across the streets, reminded her of the horrors beneath New York's surface. Even though Mr. Black was gone, the memories lingered like a ghost she couldn't shake. One evening, Sarah received an unexpected message. It was from Jake. "Meet me at the old building. Something's not right." At first, she hesitated. The thought of returning to that place, the scene of so much fear, made her stomach twist. But Jake's message felt urgent, and deep down, she knew she couldn't ignore it. She couldn't leave the past buried forever. When Sarah arrived at the building, it was different. The air felt heavy, thick with an unnatural stillness. As she stepped through the door, the familiar chill of the place wrapped around her like an old cloak. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the hallways. "Jake," she called out, her voice echoing in the silence. There was no answer. Sarah's heart began to race as she made her way deeper into the building. It was almost as if something, or someone, was watching her every move. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and an overwhelming sense of dread gripped her chest. She reached the library, where she had last seen Jake, but there was no sign of him. The bookshelves were empty, their contents scattered on the floor in a haphazard mess. And then she saw it, a journal, lying open on the ground. It was Jake's. As she flipped through the pages, her eyes widened. The entries spoke of strange occurrences, things that couldn't be explained. Objects moving on their own, whispers in the dark, and the persistent feeling that something evil was still lingering in the building. But it was the last entry that caught her breath. "I think he's back. Mr. Black isn't gone. I made a mistake. The curse isn't broken. It's only waiting for the right moment to return." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The room suddenly felt colder, and she could hear it, soft, slow footsteps from somewhere deep within the building. She wasn't alone. The shadow of Mr. Black's presence loomed again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't just the ghost of the past, it was something far more dangerous. Something that had been waiting. Sarah followed the sound of the footsteps, heart pounding. The deeper she went into the building, the darker it became. She reached the basement once more, but this time, the door was wide open. The stone altar was cracked, and the ancient symbols had faded. But at the center of it all, something new had emerged, a blackened, twisted figure, hunched over the altar. It was Jake. His eyes were hollow, his body unnaturally thin, as if life had been drained from him. But what terrified Sarah the most was the twisted, dark smile on his face. "Sarah," Jake whispered, his voice no longer his own. "You shouldn't have come back. I've become a part of him now." Before Sarah could react, the walls began to pulse with energy, and the figure of Mr. Black appeared, his dark silhouette swirling around Jake. It was as though the curse had never been broken. It had only changed, adapting to a new vessel. Sarah realized the truth: Mr. Black's spirit had never truly been banished. It had simply been lying dormant, waiting for the perfect moment to return. And now, it had taken Jake as its new host. As Sarah backed away in horror, Mr. Black's voice echoed through the basement, mocking her. "Did you really think you could destroy me? The curse is eternal, Sarah. You were a fool to think otherwise." But Sarah wasn't ready to give up. Not again. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the key once more. It was the only way. With a new determination in her heart, Sarah rushed to the altar and placed the key back in its rightful spot, chanting the words she had read long ago. The room shook violently as the walls cracked, and the ground beneath her feet splintered open. Sarah braced herself as the light from the altar burst outward, stronger than before, engulfing both Jake and Mr. Black. The darkness screamed, but this time, it was different. This time, Sarah felt the curse beginning to shatter. She could see the shadow of Mr. Black fading, his form dissolving into nothingness. In a final burst of light, the basement was silent once more. Sarah collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. The overwhelming darkness had finally lifted. But as she looked down at the ground, she noticed something disturbing. Jake's body lay motionless, no longer possessed, but he was still alive. His eyes fluttered open, but they were empty, devoid of any recognition. "Sarah!" Jake whispered weakly, his voice hoarse. But there was no longer any trace of the man she once knew. Epilogue: the building was eventually demolished, and the land was left abandoned. No one knew the true story of what had happened there. But Sarah could never forget the horrors she had faced. Every time she walked the streets of New York, she would glance over her shoulder, wondering if the shadows were truly gone. And somewhere deep in the heart of the city, hidden in the cracks of forgotten buildings, Sarah knew one truth: some curses never truly die. They just wait, silent and patient, for someone to uncover them once again. Months had passed since the building was demolished, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the curse hadn't ended. The city felt different now, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something. She had tried to move on with her life, but the memories of Jake, of Mr. Black, and of the horrors in the basement, refused to leave her. One cold evening, as Sarah walked down a familiar street in Manhattan, she couldn't help but glance at the spot where the old building once stood. A new skyscraper had risen in its place, but the unease in the air hadn't dissipated. The streets were busy, people hustling past her, but Sarah felt like she was walking through a ghost town. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a figure standing near the construction site. A man. His face was obscured by the shadows of the alleyway, but there was something familiar about his posture, the way he stood as if he were waiting for her. Her heart skipped a beat. "Jake," she whispered, her voice trembling. But as soon as she blinked, the figure disappeared into the darkness, like smoke vanishing in the night air. Sarah's heart raced. It wasn't just a trick of the light. She knew it was him. She had to find out what had happened to him after the basement. Why? Hadn't he fully returned to himself? Why had he been so empty? She found herself standing at the entrance to the subway, the faint rumble of trains echoing below. And then, without any warning, something tugged at her, an instinct, a pull that led her down the stairs into the depths of the underground. The subway was empty, eerily so, with the dim lights casting long shadows against the walls. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the silence as she walked further in, feeling as if the very walls were closing in on her. Then, she heard it. A faint whisper. Soft, but unmistakable. "Sarah," it was Jake's voice. Her blood ran cold as she turned toward the sound, but all she saw was the dark, empty tunnel ahead of her. The air grew colder still, the hairs on the back of her neck rising. She stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest, desperate to find him. And then, as if out of nowhere, the lights flickered, and the tunnel ahead of her seemed to stretch endlessly, distorting like a nightmare. Sarah blinked, and suddenly, she was no longer in the subway. She was in the old building again, the one that had been demolished. The walls were cracked, and the floor was covered in dust. But this wasn't just a vision. It was real. She saw him. Jake. But it wasn't Jake as she remembered him. His eyes were wide and vacant, and his face was pale, almost lifeless. His body was no longer the one she knew. It was as if he were caught halfway between this world and the next, unable to fully return. "Jake!" Sarah cried, rushing toward him, but he didn't move. He just stood there, staring blankly ahead. The air grew thick again, and she heard it, the soft, chilling whisper of Mr. Black's voice. It was all around her. "You should never have come back, Sarah. You didn't learn, did you? The ground beneath Sarah's feet began to crack, and the walls of the old building shifted, as though they were alive. The presence of Mr. Black was suffocating, his dark spirit wrapping itself around her like a vice. Jake's lips parted, but it wasn't his voice that came out. "He's inside of me. He's been waiting for you." The figure of Mr. Black materialized, his dark form growing larger and larger until he was standing directly in front of Sarah, his cold eyes glowing with malice. "You can't escape, Sarah. You never could." Sarah's chest tightened, and she felt a surge of panic. She realized too late that it was all a trap, an illusion. Mr. Black was still manipulating Jake, using him as a vessel to lure her back. But Sarah wasn't going to let him win. Not again. She turned to the altar, the same one she had used to break the curse before. It stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by shadows. The key was still there, buried beneath the dust. The same key she had used to stop the curse once before. This time, it had to work. This time, it had to end. With trembling hands, she grabbed the key, holding it tightly in her fist. The moment her fingers touched it, the room began to shake violently. Mr. Black's laughter echoed in the air, his shadowy form flickering like a broken mirror. But Sarah didn't flinch. She had one chance. She thrust the key into the altar, whispering the words once again, the words that had broken the curse all those months ago. The room erupted in a blinding flash of light. Epilogue: when Sarah woke up, she was lying on the cold, hard floor of the subway. The city was silent, as if nothing had ever happened. The old building, the curse, Mr. Black, everything was gone. But as she stood and glanced at the empty tunnel, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had not truly won. The darkness was still there, lingering, waiting for its next victim. And Sarah knew, deep down, that some stories were never meant to be finished. The shadows of Manhattan would always remain, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to uncover them once again. Months had passed since Sarah had broken the curse, or so she thought. Life had returned to a new normal for her. She had moved out of the apartment in the city, leaving the memories of the building and Mr. Black far behind. But the shadows of Manhattan still lingered, even in the daylight. Sarah had started a new job in a quieter part of town, hoping the distance would help her forget the terror she had faced. But even on the busiest days, there was a feeling deep inside her that something was wrong. It wasn't just the city's usual hum or the overwhelming noise of traffic. It was something darker. Something familiar. One evening, as Sarah left work, she noticed a new building under construction across the street. It was a massive structure, sleek, modern, with glass windows that reflected the fading sunlight. But as she walked past, she felt a strange chill wash over her. Something in her gut twisted, and the hairs on her neck stood up. She couldn't help it. She looked up, and for a moment, she swore she saw something in the glass, a shadow moving behind it. It was brief, but unmistakable. Sarah froze. Her mind raced back to the old building, to Mr. Black, to the spirit that had tormented her. Was this building somehow connected? Had the curse truly been broken? She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. As she hurried down the street, her steps quickened. But no matter how fast she walked, it felt like the distance between her and the shadow was closing. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, trying to calm her nerves, she heard something. Soft at first, then louder, the sound of someone whispering her name. Sarah. Her pulse quickened. It was the same voice. Mr. Black. It echoed through the silence of her apartment. No, she thought, it couldn't be. The curse was over. The darkness had been defeated. But the whispers grew louder, and suddenly, the air around her felt colder. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch, twisting and bending like living things. The temperature plummeted. Then she saw him. The tall, menacing figure of Mr. Black, standing at the foot of her bed. You can't escape me, Sarah, his voice rumbled, as cold as death itself. You were always meant to return. I will always find you. Sarah's heart raced as she scrambled backward, her breath shallow and erratic. But as she looked closer, she realized something horrifying. This wasn't the same Mr. Black she had faced before. This one was more powerful, more solid, as if his curse had been amplified. Before she could react, the figure reached out with a cold, skeletal hand and touched her arm. The contact burned like ice, sending a shock of terror through her body. Her vision blurred, and she felt herself being pulled into the darkness. When Sarah opened her eyes, she found herself standing in an unfamiliar place. The walls were dark, but there were no windows, no doors. Just an endless stretch of blackness, closing in around her. The air felt thick, suffocating. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice echoing back at her. "You're home," Mr. Black's voice answered from the shadows. "This is where you belong." Her heart sank. "No. I broke the curse. I ended it." He stepped out from the darkness, his shadowy form taller than ever. His hollow eyes glowed a pale, sickly yellow. "You never understood, did you? The curse was never about me. It was never about the building, or the ritual, or the key. It was always about you, Sarah. Your fear. Your will to survive." Sarah stumbled backward, her mind racing. "What do you mean?" "The darkness feeds on fear," Mr. Black explained, his voice dripping with malice. "The more you fear me, the stronger I become. You thought breaking the curse would set you free, but you only made it worse. You've been carrying me inside you all along. You are the curse." A cold sweat broke out across Sarah's skin as the realization hit her. The terror, the fear, the memories, she had never truly escaped. Mr. Black had never left her. He had always been with her, feeding off her anxiety and dread. All this time, he had been waiting for her to give him a reason to return. "No. No, this can't be true," Sarah gasped, her voice trembling. "It is," he hissed, stepping closer, his cold breath sending shivers down her spine. "You are the key, Sarah. You always have been. You've carried the curse your entire life, and now it's time for you to accept it." Sarah's mind raced. She couldn't accept this. She had to fight. But how could she fight something that was inside of her? "Sarah," Mr. Black's voice was a whisper now, sweet and mocking. "You can't escape yourself." With a sudden rush of strength, Sarah turned away from him, looking for a way out. But there was nowhere to go. The darkness was all around her, swallowing her whole. But then, something unexpected happened. A faint light appeared in the distance. She wasn't sure where it came from, but it was there, flickering like a fragile hope. Sarah stepped toward it, her heartbeat pounding in her chest. As she moved closer to the light, the shadows began to retreat, hissing and recoiling. Mr. Black's voice grew desperate, louder, more furious. "No. You belong to me. You will never escape me," he screamed. But Sarah kept walking toward the light, her every step defying his words. She knew now that she had to let go of her fear, her pain, and face the darkness within herself. Only then could she truly break free. Epilogue: Sarah woke the next morning in her bed, the sun shining through the windows. The city was peaceful, the chaos of the night before gone. But Sarah knew better than to believe it was over. She had seen the truth. The curse wasn't a supernatural force, it was a part of her. It was her own fear, her own unresolved pain, that had given it power. And now, she had a choice. To live in fear, or to finally confront the shadows within herself. As she stepped out into the busy streets of New York, Sarah made a vow to herself. She would no longer run. She would face her past, her fears, and the darkness that had haunted her for so long. And for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The shadows would always be there, but Sarah knew that with time and strength, she could turn them into something else, something that would no longer control her. And perhaps, just perhaps, New York's shadows would finally fade away. Sarah's life had begun to take a new shape. She faced each day with a renewed sense of purpose, no longer hiding from the fear that had defined her for so long. The city was as vibrant as ever, the hum of its pulse filling the air with a rhythm she was beginning to appreciate again. But deep down, she knew the battle wasn't over. The shadows, though quieter, still lingered, waiting for her to slip. The more Sarah focused on healing, the more she realized that her encounter with Mr. Black, the terror she had faced, wasn't just about the supernatural, it was about confronting the darkest parts of herself. Her fear had been her greatest enemy all along. But now, she had to learn to live in a world where the darkness was no longer something she could fight, but something she could understand. It was early one morning when Sarah received a call from Jake. His voice was strained, almost unrecognizable. "Sarah, I need to see you," he said urgently. "There's something you need to know. About the curse, about everything. It's not over." A wave of unease washed over her. She hadn't spoken to Jake in weeks, not since the basement, the last time she had seen him before he was taken over by Mr. Black's spirit. How could he be alive? She had left him behind in the darkness. And yet, his voice sounded real, desperate. "Where are you?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Jake responded, his voice low. "Come to the old library. The one where we found the key. The truth is hidden there. And it's calling you." Sarah didn't hesitate. Despite the fear that had been creeping up on her, she knew she had to go. The library. It was the place where it all began. The place where the curse had been set in motion. Maybe it held the answers she so desperately needed. When she arrived at the library, the air was thick with an ominous silence. It felt different from the last time she had visited. The place had been untouched for months, but today, the doors creaked open as if inviting her in. Inside, the shelves were covered in dust, the once organized rows of books now a chaotic jumble. It was eerie, unsettling, but Sarah pushed forward. The musty smell of old paper mixed with the faint scent of something burning. The lights flickered above her, casting long shadows across the room. And there, in the center of the room, was Jake. But something was wrong. His eyes were wide, unblinking. His skin was pale, and he stood completely still, as though he were waiting for something, or someone. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She called his name, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jake!" At the sound of her voice, Jake's head slowly turned toward her. But it wasn't the familiar look she remembered. His eyes, empty and glazed, fixed on her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. "You shouldn't have come back," Jake's voice echoed, but it was distorted. It wasn't his voice anymore. It was darker, deeper, inhuman. The very air around him seemed to vibrate with the presence of something old and powerful. The shadow of Mr. Black began to take shape behind him, swirling around like smoke, feeding off the fear that began to rise in Sarah's chest. "No, no," she gasped, stepping back. "This can't be happening again." Jake's lips curled into a twisted smile. "It's happening, Sarah. It's all happening. The curse was never truly broken. You broke me, but you didn't destroy him. You only gave him a new vessel." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about? You're still here." "Yes," Jake whispered, "and so is he." The figure of Mr. Black solidified behind Jake, its shadowy form massive, stretching across the walls. His eyes burned with malevolent energy, and Sarah could feel the weight of his presence pressing in on her. "You've come too far," Mr. Black's voice rang out, harsh and filled with venom. "This is the end of your journey, Sarah. The curse will never die. It will always find a way back." Panic surged within her, but Sarah fought to steady her mind. She had faced the curse before. She had faced her deepest fears and overcome them. She wasn't going to let it control her again. "What do you want, Mr. Black?" Sarah asked, her voice firm. "You can't keep doing this. You can't keep coming back." The shadows around him flickered as he let out a dark, guttural laugh. "What I want, Sarah, is for you to understand the truth. You are part of the curse. You always were. The room began to shift, and Sarah found herself standing in the middle of a twisted vision, one where she was trapped in the very building she had destroyed. The walls closed in on her, the room getting smaller and smaller. "You will never be free," Mr. Black said softly. "Not until you accept your role in all of this. You are the key, Sarah. Without you, I cannot exist. You're as much a part of me as I am of you." The walls began to bleed, the floor beneath her feet cracking and shifting like it was alive. "No," Sarah whispered. "This isn't true. I am not part of you." Mr. Black's smile widened. "That's where you're wrong. You are my legacy. And no matter where you go, no matter what you do, you will never escape it." As he advanced toward her, Sarah's mind raced. The key. The light. The truth she had discovered before. She wasn't just facing Mr. Black's curse, she was facing her own. It wasn't a curse that was tied to a building or a shadow. It was a curse within herself. The fear. The guilt. The pain she had carried for so long. But this time, she understood. She could break free, not by fighting the shadows, but by accepting them. Embracing the darkness within her and learning to control it. The curse was not an external force, it was part of her. And if she could own it, confront it head-on, she could defeat it once and for all. Epilogue. Facing the darkness with all the strength she had left, Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She let the fear wash over her, not as something to fight, but as something to accept. The darkness swirled inside her, wrapping around her heart, but instead of pushing it away, she welcomed it. "I am not afraid," she whispered. The shadows recoiled, flickering like fading embers. Mr. Black's figure faltered, his form weakening, shattering into particles of darkness. "No," he growled, "this isn't possible." But it was. Sarah had found the key to her own freedom, acceptance. The curse that had defined her for so long was no longer something to fear. The shadows of Manhattan had no power over her. As the darkness dissolved, Sarah opened her eyes to find herself standing alone in the library, the sunlight streaming through the windows. The building was silent, peaceful. She had broken the curse, not by defeating the shadow, but by conquering the fear inside herself. Sarah knew that the shadows would always be there, lurking in the corners of her mind. But now, she was no longer running from them. She had learned to live with them. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. It had been weeks since Sarah had confronted the curse. The shadows that once haunted her had faded, their grip loosening until they were nothing more than distant memories. But life, as it often does, began to settle into a new rhythm. Sarah felt lighter, freer than she ever had before. Yet, despite her newfound strength, a quiet unease remained in the back of her mind. She had learned to live with the darkness inside her, to embrace the fears and uncertainties without allowing them to control her. But there were moments when she'd be walking through the bustling streets of Manhattan, or sitting alone in her apartment, when she could feel it again. That creeping sense of being watched, of something just out of reach, lurking beneath the surface. It was on one such evening, while she was walking home after work, that she first felt it. A figure, tall and indistinct, moved through the crowd, blending with the shadows. Sarah froze for a moment, her heartbeat quickening. The figure's posture was familiar, too familiar. She couldn't be sure, but her instincts told her it was him. Her mind raced. Mr. Black? No, that couldn't be right. She had faced him, defeated him. The curse was broken. Yet, there was something about the figure, something that called to her months ago. When Sarah had first started investigating the curse, she had found an old journal hidden in the library. It had been Jake's, and it was filled with cryptic writings, strange symbols, and fragments of rituals that spoke of dark forces, of spirits bound to the city, and of the ones who could break them. At the time, she hadn't fully understood the significance of the journal, but now, it seemed to be calling her. That night, Sarah returned to her apartment and retrieved the journal from its hiding place. The pages, yellowed with age, still held the scent of dust and time. She flipped through it, searching for any clue she might have missed before. Then she found it. A symbol, a strange, looping pattern that she had seen once before. It was the same symbol she had noticed in the basement of the old building, the one carved into the altar. And it was the same symbol she had seen in Mr. Black's dark presence. Her heart sank. She had assumed the curse had been broken, that she had freed herself from its hold. But the symbol, the journal, the figure she had seen in the crowd, they all pointed to one terrible truth: she had been wrong. The curse was not gone. It had simply been dormant, waiting for the right moment to return. And worse, it wasn't just Mr. Black who had been tied to this darkness. There were others, ancient spirits, bound to the city, to its very foundation, feeding off the fear and despair of its people. Mr. Black was just one part of a much larger, much more dangerous force. Sarah felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She wasn't free. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, Sarah found herself digging deeper into the secrets of the journal, uncovering more symbols, more clues. She spent sleepless nights researching the occult, finding connections between the city's history and the rituals that had bound these spirits to it. Every new discovery seemed to pull her deeper into the darkness. And then, one night, it happened again. She was sitting in her apartment, reading through the journal when a knock at the door broke the silence. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? She opened the door to find Jake standing there, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. But it wasn't the familiar Jake she had known. There was something different about him, something darker, hollow in his expression. "Sarah," Jake said, his voice trembling. "He's back. And it's worse than we thought." Before she could respond, Jake collapsed in front of her, gasping for breath. "I saw him again. Mr. Black. He's not the only one. There's something else, something much older. Something that's been waiting." Sarah helped him to his feet, her mind racing. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Jake looked up at her, his eyes filled with dread. "There are more of them. Spirits, ancient ones. The ones who started all of this. They've been waiting for the right moment to return. And now, they're gathering again. The curse wasn't broken, Sarah. It's just been lying in wait, feeding off the fear that's still out there. And it's stronger than ever." Sarah felt her heart sink. The weight of his words crushed her, but she knew they were true. The shadows hadn't gone anywhere. They were still here, still watching, still waiting. Everything had been put to rest. It had taken everything she had, but Sarah had learned that the greatest battles were not fought in the physical world, but in the heart and mind. The darkness had never truly been an external force, it had always been a reflection of her deepest fears. Only by accepting those fears, by facing the darkness within herself, had she been able to find true freedom. And as the sun rose over New York, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For the first time, the shadows were gone, not just from the city, but from her heart. The curse that had defined her for so long had finally been broken, not through destruction, but through understanding and acceptance. Sarah smiled to herself, knowing that while the darkness would always exist in the world, it would no longer control her. The city was hers to walk, free of fear, free of shadows. And so, Sarah moved forward, embracing the new day, knowing that she had conquered not only the darkness of Manhattan, but her own.